Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here with us again. We also want to thank the folks who came to our meeting last month where we heard from Rasan Hall, who talked about his work with the Urban League of Massachusetts. And interestingly, we just learned that he's going to be honored next month by the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association with their Trailblazer Award for the work that he's done at the Urban League. So you got a great preview of what he'll be talking to them about at the gala in May, in that work that he's been doing. But I want to talk about a couple of things before we begin with our guests. As many of you may have seen, the ADL has once again reported a really worrisome increase in the white supremacist propaganda incidents. They are up 12% across the country. The good news, I guess, if there is any, is that here in Massachusetts, we have seen a decline in those incidents from 455 in 2022 to 339 last year. Of course, that number is still much too big, but it does show that, and largely in part based on the work of a lot of folks on this call, that we are going, at least seem to be going in the right direction. And groups such as Patriot Front seem to have reduced a lot of their propaganda distribution, but they're now having some very large, highly visible protests here in the Northeast. And it really means that they're shifting their tactics, and we're going to have to be vigilant in thinking about how we respond to that. The other very concerning trend, and we're going to talk a little bit about this morning, that we've been hearing about is the Zoom bomb. We're back to the Zoom bombing, racially targeting rants, if you will, happening during public meetings. And they're coming over digital platforms such as Zoom. And for the local police chiefs, all of whom we've spent a lot of time educating on these issues and working with, as well as other enforcement agencies, they've been very proactive. They've been using lots of resources. They're coordinating with the FBI and with the Fusion Center, which here in Massachusetts is kind of where all the agencies come together. We've been looking very carefully at those reports as they've been coming in. We've been out talking to community groups about what people seem to be willfully confused about, that being free speech and the kind of speech that's happening at some of these meetings, and really the impact it's having on so many, especially local officials. When you run for school committee or run for the select board, you sign up for some things, you don't sign up for those kinds of threats or public displays of hate. So we're working very hard on that. But what we really want to encourage once again, and for all of you in the networks you are in, is having people report incidents. We'll put again in the chat our form that's out there. People can, if they want, report anonymously. I was out at a lot of celebrations and dedications and things over the weekend, and people were talking about a lot of things that had happened in the community that aren't making their way to us. So it's hard for us to be looking for patterns and deploying resources if we don't get that. And one of our speakers today is going to talk about the delicate balance that may exist for members of our community when something happens and you know or certainly suspect that a member of your family may be involved in that incident, when either they've done the Zoom bombing or they've become a member of that extremist group and you don't know where to go. It is a very hard place to be. It may be a child, a sibling. Do you call the police? Who do you report that to? People are probably not going to be very sympathetic to that issue. And coupled with the difficulty that law enforcement has, because people can use so many tech evasions with identifying those folks, we really do need that help from people who are on the other side of what's happening, if you will, and know or certainly suspect that a family member or close friend may be responsible for that. And what we want to do is just educate people, get the services out into the community. And our other speaker today is going to talk about another controversial topic, certainly in this area, and that is the push for affordable housing and zoning reform in Massachusetts. And I think you would have to have been absent for the last few months if you've missed the heated debates that have been going on in some of our cities and towns about that. And the central question is and remains, how do you build housing or develop housing policies that address the affordability crisis, but also act to racially and economically diversify our neighborhoods and our towns. We've tried through legislative measures these initiatives to really take down those barriers that have existed for decades, and the exclusionary practices so people have an equitable shot at housing have been hard. It's been a very long road. And the value of home ownership, and I know you've all read a lot about this, is just really more than having the house itself. It is what it means about getting a foothold in a community, getting a foothold in having familial wealth, stability, all of those things. There was a very interesting article in the Boston Globe, maybe a month or so ago, about a two-family house in Watertown and how an immigrant family a couple of generations ago had been able to buy that house, and very large family of two siblings bought the house, one sibling on one floor, one on the other. They've now all had multiple children. People have lived there, gone to college, come back and lived there. But it really has given so many members of that family maybe the time and space to be living there and going to school or working in a certain job or getting on their feet with small children to do lots and lots of things because the family could help them with that. So it's important to keep in mind all of that pieces. And on March 25th, you might have also seen a very sad article in the New York Times. It was about a Black couple in Baltimore. And in 2022, they were thinking about selling their house. They had their home assessed, and it was assessed for $472,000. And they didn't think that was a fair assessment. So they went through their house and removed everything that would identify them as being Black homeowners, all the photographs, documents, everything. And they then had a white friend stand in for them. They had the same company come back and do that assessment. This time the house was assessed at $750,000. And that couple, Dr. Nathan Conley and Dr. Shani Mott, filed a suit against Loan Depot, who was and the appraiser. So both the lender and the appraiser. The case recently settled against Loan Depot. It's still pending against the appraiser. Unfortunately, the amount that Loan Depot is going to pay has been sealed. Very sadly, Dr. Mott died just a couple of weeks ago without actually getting any of that money. She was an accomplished professor who lectured on Black studies. And the importance of this is not just the damages that that family will get, but it really is leading to an overall change in policies at Loan Depot. They're gonna create a path where other homeowners who feel that their assessment is inappropriate will have an easier way to challenge that rather than filing a lawsuit. And that equity, remember, when your assessment is one thing and your house then sells for a very different price, you've lost what you built up there, which is the equity in that house. And Loan Depot, as a result of the settlement, has agreed that they will clearly communicate to anybody applying for an assessment their rights if they are dissatisfied, their right to request a review or an adjustment, all of that. It's important because Loan Depot is the sixth largest lender in the United States. So to force them to change their practices will have a big impact. And it's a complex issue. We all know you can't make more land. And in some of our cities and towns, there's not a lot of land. So you have to be thinking about better ways to use what you have, better ways to use existing housing, to use other buildings. It's going to take legislative reform, financial initiatives, community engagement, and really education so that everybody's response is, this sounds like a great idea, but I don't want it coming to a town near me, which is what we've been seeing a lot of. So that work, the same kind of work to combat hate and bias, that's what we've all been doing together. So I'm very grateful to all of you for the work that you are doing out in the community. The fact that we're having these conversations that these issues are coming up is showing that groups are really holding people to accountability on some of those issues. And I'm particularly happy to have with us today Rosa Ordaz, who is just one of such people. Rosa is the Director of Community Engagement and Services for Harbor Light Homes. She oversees in that job resident services, advocacy, and education for Harbor Light Homes, which is a nonprofit community development corporation that builds and manages affordable housing. Her team supports seniors, families, formerly homeless individuals to really get settled, to live and thrive with dignity in their new homes. She's looking to create a really high quality of life through supportive services that can be put in place, partnerships, data creation systems, so they can really track and see what's working and what's not working, how to measure the efficiency of what they're doing, and make sure that all of their properties are having equal access to the services. Prior to joining Harbor Light in late 2018, excuse me, Rosa was the Director of Transition and Community Services at Triangle Inc. Many of you know Triangle. It's a nonprofit organization that supports people with disabilities. And she there oversaw the community-based day services and employment programs. She serves on the boards of the Latino Leadership Coalition, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Partnership for Financial Equity, and is a member of the Policy Leadership Council. And a proud resident of the great city of Salem, Rosa and her family enjoy being in the outdoors, frequenting restaurants, coffee shops, breweries, and cheering on the ever heartbreaking Los Angeles Dodgers. Rosa holds a Master's of Arts in Counseling from Loyola Marymount and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Nevada at Las Vegas. She's going to talk about the research that her team has been doing in partnership with the North Shore chapter of the NAACP on the practices surrounding deed restrictions on the North Shore. These deed restrictions, which are now legally void, kept Black and Hispanic households, sometimes Jewish and other ethnicities, from living there by containing language that prohibited certain properties from being sold to anyone who was a member of those groups. And they would specifically say that the house could not be sold to or occupied by any person other than those of the Caucasian race. So when we think about how far we have to come, we do it against that backdrop. And you might have seen that Milton Valencia just wrote an article in the Globe on this subject, and we'll put that in the chat if you haven't seen it. Rosa is going to talk about what they are doing to rebuild the communities in the aftermath of those practices, how to help communities accrue that wealth that goes with home ownership, and how to connect them to resources and programs that can offer some financial assistance. So Rosa, we're very grateful to have you here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for the great introduction, and I'm kind of in awe hearing about this group and what you all do. So I also just want to thank you for the time that you dedicate to being here and thinking through, how to make our communities better for everyone. So nice to be with you all. And Antonia, thank you for giving me a call a couple of weeks ago and putting this together. So today I'm going to primarily focus on the Dirty Deeds Project. I do have a couple of slides for you about affordability and Harbor Light, but those will be pretty brief, just so we can concentrate more on the data. Can someone remind me how much time I have? Is it 15 minutes?
Yeah, 15, 20.
15, 20. Okay. Because there's a lot to say, so I could talk for a long time. All right, let me just share my screen really quick. Okay, can you all see my PowerPoint? Okay, great. All right, so let me put this in presentation mode. Okay, so as oh, sorry, my hovering is acting a little funny. Sorry, one second. Okay, so as Marion described, I'm here to talk about the Dirty Deeds Project and a little bit about Harbor Light Homes and kind of who we are. And we're going to focus on the data that this project has made wide open for us and the correlations and the impacts of that as we see today. So very briefly, about Harbor Light, we're a CDC, we're a nonprofit affordable housing developer. We have 478 current homes throughout the North Shore, spanning from Lynn all the way to Gloucester and Rockport. We also manage a couple other properties and communities such as Saugus that you see on this map. And we build and manage it ourselves. So we're on properties for the long run, also providing supportive services in a variety of different ways, depending on the populations living in those buildings. So for families, we really encourage economic mobility and also obviously a safe, stable place, connect them to resources for their children, such as scholarships and school enrollment, daycare vouchers, things like that. And for our seniors, we really focus on bringing high quality supports into their home in order to maintain independence. And, the ultimate goal is for them to be able to die safely in their home, as we all would want. Here's a little bit about our buildings and our current portfolio. I'm happy to email you all of this if you would like, if you're interested in that. As part of who we are and part of why I'm here and why I get to do what I do is we do focus heavily on advocacy and education. It sounds like this group is very aware of the resistance that we often encounter in communities when trying to build affordable housing and having policies that allow for that to occur. So some of the things that we do at Harbor Light include doing conversations and presentations just like this with different groups that are interested. We also host a Housing Institute, which is a more technical in nature program for people that are serving on boards and commissions related to housing. So people tasked with making housing decisions at the local level. We want to help them understand, how everything works and what they can do to be supportive. We also have a Housing Stewards program, which is more Housing 101 basic knowledge for community members that are interested and not sure what to do and how to help. We talk a lot about that and build community through that program. We also co-teach first-time homebuyer programs with our partners, North Shore Realtors. We also are a referring agency for Stash, which I'll talk about a little bit later as part of that homebuyer course. And the thing I want to focus on today is the Dirty Deeds Project. But along with that, we also do a couple of legislative briefings and other kinds of advocacy year-round in order to promote housing-friendly policies. So very briefly, I could just probably show you this slide and call it a day. Why we do what we do, this is it. So we have had 4 recent lotteries for affordable homes, and you can see these numbers. 38, family 2 and 3 bedroom units in Beverly. We received 596 applications for 38 homes. Granite Street Crossing in Rockport, 17 senior, 6 family townhomes, 460. You can see Briscoe and Maple Woods, which are senior developments. The numbers remain very high, 565 and 366. So needless to say, the need is great, and we need to continue to build affordable housing. Just as an FYI, you can find this on our website under open lotteries. Here are the upcoming lotteries. If you are interested or know anybody that might want to know this information, we are building a second family home as part of Anchor Point. So that first slide that you just saw, that lottery is going to happen towards the end of the year, but applications will be available here shortly in about a month or so. As part of that development, we also are philanthropically raising funds for the Lighthouse Center to really support a lot of what we're talking about today, which is really trying to, create equitable communities and resources and support for low income and moderate income families. So as part of that, Lighthouse Center will have on-site daycare. We'll have multiple purpose community spaces and programming, including outdoor spaces for kids and adults, pickleball courts, half a basketball court, green playing field, a playgrounds, 2 playgrounds, raised garden beds, things like that. So really, trying to make this place a home and a community place for people to be. We also have Catalyst Housing coming up in Lynn. So that is 24 single occupancy studios for young adults that are at risk of homelessness or aging out of the foster care system. And those applications will be available mid-July. The lottery we're expecting to be early next year. And again, you can find all of this on our website. So very quickly, you know, as you might all know, every municipality in Massachusetts is tasked with having a minimum of 10% of affordable housing within its housing stock. Very quick research. Here are some North Shore communities for you to take a look at and who is achieving their 10% goal. And I say goal loosely because we should really be developing more than 10%, but this is how all of these North Shore communities stack up. Part of the issue here, as you might already be aware of, is that there is no consequence per se for communities that do not build at least 10% of affordable housing within their housing stock. So how did we get here? You know, how did we get into this housing crisis, and how did we get into such inequitable communities and segregated communities and high prices and, you know, short availability of rentals and properties to purchase? Zoning. So I'm assuming zoning is a term that's pretty familiar to this particular group, so I won't spend too much time talking about it, but very briefly, it dictates what you can build where and who gets to live where as a result of it. This slide here will show you we are one of the slowest states in housing production. So we have experienced growth over the last 10 years, but it still remains far below historic levels. And a lot of this comes back to zoning. You know, a lot of our zoning is very stringent, single family zoning, and it's you know, taking up a lot more land than multifamily development would. So we have decades of underproduction that has led us to a shortage of about 200,000 homes. It also has contributed to our high home prices and high interest rates. So in about 20 to 21, those years, 46,000 people left the state of Massachusetts, most often to move to a place with lower cost of living. So a lot of the times, you know, we'll hear like, okay, well, people are leaving Massachusetts. You know, why are groups pushing that we need more housing production? When you're losing population, it's not a good thing. It's not a positive thing. You know, you have to think about who is leaving. And oftentimes it's our working age folks, our families with children, right? You need people to stay in your state, contributing to the economy. And a lot of the reason behind the state that we find ourselves in is restrictive zoning that has prevented the diversification of housing types and has really led us to segregated neighborhoods, which really brings us to the Dirty Deeds Project. Another, you know, brief definition of what zoning is. It's the legal code regulating the use of land. Very difficult to change, dictated by the local level primarily. So very quickly, zoning history. So in the early 20th century, we already saw how Jim Crow laws and redlining practices really played out in the United States. We had policies enacted by our government that forbid Black and other minorities from living in white neighborhoods, and also in neighborhoods that were receiving less funding and therefore were, you know, not as vibrant or in healthy environments as white neighborhoods. Also, as the example from Baltimore, right, we saw obviously different types of value associated with the properties within those neighborhoods. Essentially, what this became was a method to ban people of color from being able to live in certain communities. And then later on, this really developed into single family zoning anywhere, banning multifamily development, which we had pushed people of color into by forbidding them to purchase homes within viable neighborhoods. So jumping into the Dirty Deeds Project, this is a massive partnership.
Rosa, I think you're frozen.
thanks to the Mapping Prejudice team at the University of Minnesota Libraries. So they are a team of researchers and really smart people that developed an algorithm, to be able to help us extract this data. The Essex County Registry of Deeds that covers Essex County, in the south portion of it, was super helpful and, allowed us access to all of the deeds that we refer to in this project. And we had a ton of community volunteers help us scour all of those digitized copies to ensure or confirm or deny the presence of racially restrictive language. And to this day, all throughout the country, only a portion of these deeds are actually digitized. So this work remains pretty difficult to do. So the data here, here it is. So across 100 communities, this is how it breaks down. I don't know if anybody has any initial impressions or any surprises that they see here, but you can see a direct correlation between the racially demographics of these municipalities and tie them back to these racially restrictive covenants. So places like Linfield and Nahant, which have a kind of skewed high number of racially restrictive covenants present in their deeds, have a higher percentage of white residents modern day. Out of the 567 deeds, 146 of those were deemed as active, meaning that somewhere in the deed, it referred to the racially restrictive covenant. Out of that data, we broke it down. A lot of GIS layering broke that down to 103 modern properties. So a lot of those plots, definitely changed over time as pieces of the plots were sold and the zoning changed slightly, down to 103 from the 500 plus that we initially found. The majority of these deeds, interestingly enough, belong to primarily 5 landowners, all of whom were white, and there are 356 unique property owners listed as modern day. What's interesting about what the data tells us as well is when you start looking at migration patterns and the number of deeds present within the years that you see here on this slide, you can almost follow like what was happening in the world and what groups of people were leaving and migrating to different places. And you see the addition of those groups as being barred from purchasing homes. So initially, the very early deeds in the early 1900s, just simply stated anybody of the Negro race was prohibited from purchasing or inhabiting a space. And then later on, you start to see the addition of Jews, the Irish, Armenians, Polish, and then at the very end, you start to get to language that just says anybody who is not of the Caucasian race cannot purchase a home and cannot inhabit this structure. So what are the lasting impacts of these racially restrictive covenants? Almost all of the deeds have been determined to be in places that are now single-family residential districts. Only one area was not, and that is part of a business district. So we see the lasting effects of the redlining practices enacted by our government early on and the racially restrictive covenants at the local level on the North Shore with single-family zoning. So again, it started as redlining, transitioned to single-family zoning as a method of control and to exclude certain groups from living in certain places. Lasting impacts, again, home ownership rates. So as you can see on this slide, unsurprisingly, the majority of homeowners continue to be white compared to other groups of color with lower rates. And the next slide, you see a comparison of New England versus United States of those communities of color. New England is way more exclusionary, lower home ownership rates for communities of color than the rest of the United States. So a lot of the times, people think about economic disparities as related to slavery, which of course plays a role, but oftentimes people don't talk about the power of home ownership and wealth and equity and the opportunity that provides someone. and the blocking of communities of color from gaining the same equity and wealth through homeownership for decades. You can read more about this project on our website, which is linked here, and I'd be happy to share this presentation if the group wants it. I also want to mention that as his final act in office last year, Registrar O'Brien added a note in the chain of the title of all of these deeds, acknowledging and condemning the existence of racially restrictive covenants, which was pretty cool. Our hope is that other municipalities or other counties take up this project and find a way to also do the same, and really eradicate that language, which is of course not legally binding to anything now, but is still the right thing to do. There are also a couple of articles and podcasts that you can find on our website, which is also linked here. So what can we do? How can we take steps, to improve the damage that has been done? So this really comes down to how do we try to make a field a little bit more equitable when we have purposely excluded and prevented certain groups from affording the same opportunities. Really, it comes down to two things: local support and state support for homeownership programs, financial assistance, and also access to safe and affordable housing. So locally, supporting housing-friendly policy that allows for a diversification of housing types at different incomes is crucial. And what we mean by that is it doesn't all have to be, 20-story buildings, doesn't all have to be single-family homes. There can be a variety of different housing types that are accessible to different types of families and different incomes. So sometimes that can be, local ordinances that allow for accessory dwelling units, for example, or granny flats or in-law apartments, that allow someone who might not be able to afford an apartment or a home to rent a smaller accessory dwelling unit to stay in a community that is important to them. We can also support policies like inclusionary zoning, which require developers to include affordable units as part of their entire development. This can be for home ownership or rental. And we can also support multifamily zoning, especially near transit, to make it more accessible and create walkable neighborhoods so that everyone has access to things like fresh produce and medical care and businesses and jobs. We also can support the creation of affordable housing trusts and community preservation act participation within communities. So both of those are mechanisms to set aside dollars for affordable housing. And first-time homebuyer programs and assistance, when we're talking about building wealth and creating equity, that's probably one of the most important things that we can do in order to try to make up for some of the damage that was done. So there's a couple of first-time homebuyer opportunities that I just want to highlight briefly. So, one of the first steps for a lot of access to these programs is taking an approved first-time homebuyer course. Taking a course also.
I'm
Sorry,
good.
go
About you. To get some sleep. I know, I'm dragging.
Marion, you need to mute yourself.
Thanks. I totally lost. Okay. Taking a home buyer course also makes you eligible for some affordable mortgage programs, which often require a lower down payment and might have a better interest rate and approval ratings for people with lower credit scores. Also, taking a first-time homebuyer class makes you eligible for different programs such as the STASH program, which is up to $25,000 of down payment assistance for first-generation buyers, i.e. your parents cannot have owned property. And, when we're talking about racial demographics, that is most often buyers of color who have parents that have not owned property. So that's a great program also to consider. Mass Streams is currently out of funding, but there is within the governor's bond bill, which we'll talk about briefly, additional funding that's being proposed. That's also a down payment assistance program that hopefully will come back and help with racial equity and mortgage access. And there's also some local assistance programs by municipality. And My Mass Home is just in general a great resource for anybody looking for a deed restricted home to purchase. So at the state level, briefly, I just want to check on time. I think I'm almost out of time. So at the state level, there are two monumental opportunities before us, and we say they're monumental because typically zoning is dictated at the local level. So support for the MBTA 3A law, or multifamily zoning by right near transit, and the Affordable Homes Act within the governor's bond bill are really key and what we're focusing on right now. That's a repetitive slide, sorry. So 30 seconds. What is the MBTA law? If you're not familiar, it basically is a requirement for 177 MBTA communities to allow for multifamily zoning by right near transit. So that means they cannot require special permits, they cannot have age restrictions, and they have to be homes that are suitable for families with children. So that means, you can't build studios that you have to be 62 plus to live in. It has to be located within a half a mile of a station, depending on the community designation, of which there are 4. And it also is not a mandate to build, which is an important distinction. It is rather a law that you have to create a zone that allows for multifamily development. So this is an important piece to highlight because that affordability can be taken up at the local level. So locally, a municipality can decide to require an affordability component to this law, but it's not part of it. So here is how you can support the MBTA law, which I'm going to skip over, but you basically get involved at the local level and figure out what is going on, because everyone is in the middle of very heated conversations. Or you might have read in the Globe about Milton, who has decided they are not going to comply with the law and are getting sued by the Attorney General. Very quickly, Affordable Homes Act. There's a lot in this bill. We probably need about an hour to go over the entire bill. So very briefly, $4 billion in investment in housing. This breaks down across a variety of different ways. You can read a summary down at the bottom in that orange text, but it's broken out into 3 places: policy initiatives, capital authorizations, and tax credits. These are our priorities that you see here. For our conversation, I want to highlight that second bullet. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This is a trust fund at the state level, which provides funding for households whose incomes are not more than 110%, but more importantly, includes, not more importantly, as importantly, $50 million for Mass Dreams, which again is that down payment program that we talked about briefly for first-time home buyer opportunities for households in disproportionately impacted communities. And you can see the rest of the initiatives down below. Here is how you can get involved. Right now, it has been presented in front of 2 committees. We expect it to go to the Ways and Means, and then after that, it will go to the state and the Senate. So if you want to get involved, read the Affordable Homes Act summary and reach out to your local state rep and senator and ask them to support the Affordable Homes Act. I also have a template if anybody wants it. Happy to share it. Think I went over, but that's it.
Rosa, that was great. Thank you. And you will share the presentation, right? Because people are asking already for that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Perfect.
And I link some stuff in there for folks so they can click around at their leisure.
Okay. Questions, comments for Rosa?
I just want to ask a quick question, Rosa. As you were saying, I don't know if this was grant funded but this was a massive taking on this study. How could municipalities or different towns start at least starting to have this conversation where they maybe don't have a grant or the funding that did this search to bring it to Middlesex County?
This is for the Dirty Deeds Project, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question, and probably information I should have included. So we kind of took it on, just because we heard about the project and we were so fascinated. So the University of Minnesota did this for a county that was close to them, And we reached out to them. And then after that, we got a notice that we were approved for a 5-year grant that is focused on advocacy and education. And so we diverted some of those funds to this effort because we felt it was really important. And I think if anybody else wanted to replicate this project, your first step is likely to try to figure out if there is an entity that can do this coding of the deeds for you, because as surprisingly to me anyway, maybe not to everybody else on this call, a lot of those deeds are not digitized. So you have to have some sort of tech behind you, which I cannot describe, that somebody to take all of those deeds and digitize them, and then you're going to need volunteers to go through each of those deeds and confirm that the language is or is not there. And then we worked with a GIS expert to really pinpoint, where did these exist? What is, he put on a multiple layers that I cannot articulate because I don't understand the work, but basically translated, okay, these are the historical plots, here are the modern day plots, and then converge them. And you can see an interactive map on our website of where those are. I don't actually have a total cost for the project. I can tell you that the most expensive thing was probably our GIS person, our support there, and the creation of it for our website, the interactive map. And then we also did mass mailings and as an effort to alert homeowners for the existence of the covenants. So the expenses associated with that.
Thanks. Linda? You got to take yourself off mute.
Yeah, sorry, I was actually typing my question in. Thank you so much for this presentation. You talk a lot about ownership of properties. There are also those who can't afford yet to own, but need affordable housing, for instance, with rental properties, and that can include those with special needs challenges. And the Section 8 waiting list is anywhere, I'm told, anywhere from 6 months to 2 years plus. So I'm wondering if Harbor Light, or if you are also dealing with those challenges. I personally have a little sister who's dealing with needing to move out of a house she can't afford anymore. But there's no housing for her to go to. So she's being advised to stay there and go in default. So I'm just wondering if you have any insights. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And, as you heard, I worked at a disability organization prior to my time at Harbor Light, and it's, people with disabilities are one of the groups that are, I think, having the most difficult time in terms of housing that is created, that is accessible and affordable to them. So I definitely am aware of that. So we, just to give you some perspective, we have over 600 names on our waiting lists. We have moved to a universal application to try to make it easier for folks, especially, people with disability or people that just don't have, the time or the access to fill out multiple applications. And we also have made the conscious decision to build ADA and sensory friendly units within our buildings, but there is no requirement for any of that. So you really have to know kind of where to look for those units, and we try to advertise those specific kind of disability friendly, all ability friendly, in places that we know people will see them that need them. Unfortunately, we don't seem to have a high number of applicants that would have that preference. And so we haven't quite figured out why that is yet. We've talked to people in those communities, and some of it might be the price point and the income or lack thereof of disabled folks. But yeah, I would recommend also that you take a look at My Mass Home. There is a section there that has like short waiting lists. And I don't know how they define short, but you could look there, and you could also look, there's a filter function, I believe, that allows you to filter through like ADA compliant units.
I know just something you're probably already aware of. My little sister, this is through the Big Brother organization. One of her challenges is that she can't fill out these forms. She doesn't understand them, and she gets lost. And then she'll fill something out, get a phone call, and then she'll say no because she can't hear or doesn't understand. And so I would think with some of your the challenges that people are facing, just forms in general, and her caseworkers are overwhelmed, and so they aren't all that accessible to her either.
Yeah, I'm not sure where she lives, but maybe there's a disability resource center near her, or we do have a team of a lottery team, but as you might be able to imagine, they can't, spend a considerable amount of time with every applicant. But if accessibility was an issue, like we would ask if she was applying for our homes, we would ask her to just reach out to us, see if we could help in some way.
She is in Salem.
Oh, okay. So you're probably familiar with the DRC.
Yes. Yeah, they're not having much luck.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I think I see another hand, Reverend Lloyd.
Hi, Rosa. Thank you so much for your work. Having lived previously on the North Shore 20 years and bought my first home there, but needed a realtor to run cover in order for me to get the home that I bought, because they realized I was African American, and therefore they weren't doing it. And so, and that's within the last 30 years, just so you know. So the reality is still real. Two questions. One is a question, maybe Marion, we mentioned about the Baltimore couple and the fact that decision being sealed, and yet we do have a little bit of the info in terms of the settlement, and whether or not, because it's sealed, it limits the chilling effect on other realtors. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And what can be done so we don't have these kinds of decisions that are made continually in the dark, in the back room. And yet the effect of it is not so much the money I get out of it as it changes the system. So that's one for Marion. For you, Rosa, is this whole MBTA and this here process. And I'm in Framingham, and my church is located downtown Framingham, a block and a half from the train station. I've got this massive development that's there going on and what have you. The chilling effect, a part of that, my observation is this on 2 points. One is, it means that continually we're doing a development on south side of Framingham and nothing on the north side, or limited north side. And just that's a chilling effect of that zoning business. The second part is what it means is that it basically becomes a commuter community centered on my south side. And what that means is that we have these developments, housing, and they are not necessarily participating in community. It's bedroom, which in essence means that somewhere along the line, I'm going to once again develop these one little enclaves that we've seen over these massive developments over time, and for which it's really not changing my landscape of Framingham. And so literally, as someone leaned over me the other day in a meeting last week, I was doing a presentation and said, Reverend Lloyd, I just want you to know, I know the people on the north side of Framingham, and they just love the idea of being in Framingham because of its diversity, whatever their definition of diversity is. But then she said, I said to my white friend, okay, yes, great. But what about going downtown Framingham? Oh, wait a minute. They need to keep that housing down there. I don't want it on the north side of town. So there's this effect from these decisions that we make. And I don't know if anybody's doing anything to say we need to tweak something here if we're going to make this landscape more equitable.
Right. Yeah, no, yeah, thank you for those remarks. And there's honestly there's a lot to unpack there. I feel like we could talk about this over coffee for a couple hours, but
Uh-huh.
so couple of just quick thoughts. You know, we are, you know, we've had a lot of conversation internally, right? And we are aware that this law in some places will kind of for lack of a better word, perpetuate the pattern, right? Of the housing is located over there, those folks live over there, don't build it over here, right? So part of that is dictated at the local level of like where there's a lot of specifics which you might be familiar with, right? With the law that say X% has to be contiguous land, X% has to be developable land, blah, 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 blah. So I don't know if Framingham in particular, I don't know off the top of my head, if that has already been decided of like where it's going to go and what that district is. But I think on the, you know, the broader picture is that this law is better than not having any mandate to relax zoning anywhere, right? So we do realize it is a blanket solution that impacts communities in a lot of different ways, but there are communities with very low density around MBTA stations that are single family or have multiple stations, all of which have very low density around them, that have, you know, kind of like the example you just gave, have not done anything to change their zoning and to create more housing. So this law is a tool in alleviating some of that pressure. It is not a solution by any means. It's not going to resolve the housing crisis or the segregation of communities that we see now. You know, what we're kind of saying is the law is better than having nothing in place. It is not a requirement to build. It's a requirement to allow for the building of multifamily zoning. You know, a lot of that work still has to be done at the local level. So looking at whether Framingham has any pockets that are not in that area you just described of South Framingham or South Downtown that allow for anything other than single family zoning. It sounds like the north side is all single family zoning. So I don't know if you have inclusionary zoning or if you have other pockets of zoning that allow for something other than single family, but it's definitely the bigger conversation. But this law is, you know, one piece, right? And trying to alleviate some of that. It is very frustrating for sure.
Thanks.
And Reverend Lloyd, if we can, just for the sake of time, can I hold the answer on your
Please,
question?
oh, certainly. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rosa. That was wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And now, turning to Pat Rickards, who's with us and is the Executive Director and CEO of Life After Hate, which is the country's leader in the violence intervention community. And it is the first nonprofit in the United States dedicated to helping individuals disengage from violent hate groups and hateful online spaces. Pat's had a really amazing career. He's advised 3 presidential administrations, more than a half dozen cabinet level agencies on policy and public engagement. He's worked for a member of the United States House of Representatives, 3 United States senators for the Senate Appropriations Committee. He is the founder of the Driving Force Institute for Public Engagement, which is a national effort to transform the teaching and learning of American history and civics through short form films, and an effort that now has over 52 million users. He's a former university vice president, served as the chief of communications and strategy officer for the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. And if that's not enough to be doing, he is also an award-winning author. He writes and tweets under the handle Eduflac, and he's the author of 2 award-winning books and a primary editor and contributing author of 2 other books. Patrick regularly speaks on the intersection of policy, research, media, and community engagement, as well as on how to both successfully disengage and de-radicalize violent extremism. And he's going to talk today about the work that the organization has been doing to try to help people exit extreme hate groups. I think we all know it's easy for people to fall into them, maybe not so easy to exit them. And those practices to get out are really, it involve education, intervention, research, and outreach. So Pat, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And just so everybody, I do have Massachusetts ties. I was raised outside of Boston, in Sharon, Mass. The congressman that you mentioned was John Olver from Western Massachusetts. I worked for John for a number of years, and was very, very fortunate enough to marry my lovely wife from the Berkshires. Her father still lives in Pittsfield, so I still have my connections back to the Bay State.
Excellent.
Appreciate the opportunity. As I said, it's one of those things. It's always fascinating when you have these discussions. I think we always have this assumption in our head, this picture of what a violent far-right extremist looks like in the United States. And it's often driven by the media. You can look at movies like American History X. We assume it's someone who looks something like me, shaved head, lots of tattoos, wearing the tight jeans, the Doc Marten boots with the white laces to signify white power. And unfortunately, the hate community in the United States is far more diverse than that, particularly today. Had we had this conversation 20-some years ago, it may very well have looked like that. It doesn't look like that now. There's now a flavor of hate for just about anyone in the United States. When we look at the active groups, both those that are national and those that are regional and local, we can find groups that are anti-African American. We can find groups that are anti-Latino, anti-immigrant, anti-undocumented immigrant, anti-Asian, anti-Muslim, anti-LGBTQ, anti-government, anti-Middle Eastern. But we do know that every single hate group in the United States today is rooted both in anti-Semitism and misogyny. That is a common thread in every single active hate group in the United States today. So that sort of tells us where we're starting. What becomes fascinating, as Marian had noted, we spend our time at Life After Hate. We help individuals disengage from violent extremist groups and online hate spaces. It's not an easy work. And the clients that we serve have changed dramatically as the times change. So to give you a sense of who seeks our services, 50% of our clients are women who have been active in violent extremist groups. 20% of our clients identify now as LGBTQ+. We have individuals who are Black and members of violent white supremacy groups. We have individuals who are Latino and are members of violent white supremacy groups. It is incredibly complicated. It is incredibly messy. And it's gotten even more so in recent years. I am often asked, do I think that in the last 5 or 10 years has the amount of hate in this country increased? I don't believe it has. What I do believe is that we now are very free to be public and open with our hate and with our hateful ideology, whereas in the past we used to keep it hidden, only from those who knew us well. Now it's almost a badge of honor to display some of that ideology. So the question I'll often get then is, what exactly do we do? How does this work? Life After Hate has a team of individuals who provide tertiary care services to those who are looking to disengage from violent extremist groups. What this means is we have individuals who are trained as social workers. They serve as case managers for all of our clients. And then they are paired up with individuals that we call exit specialists. Our exit specialists are themselves former violent extremists, many of whom have done prison time for hate crimes, who have experienced everything and anything that a client will come to us with, and then are able to help them as they navigate their path out. So then the next question is often, okay, well, how exactly do people come to Life After Hate? Historically, and we've been doing this now for about 14 years, historically, they've come to us one of two ways. The first is what was mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, is you'll have loved ones who will reach out. They will realize that they are trapped in a relationship with a violent extremist. They will realize that a child of theirs may be going down a path that they're not particularly proud of. And what can they do to help? They will reach out to us for assistance. And we will take on both the family and friends, the loved ones as clients, and then we'll work with the person that they care about. But those family and loved ones will often reach out because they need to understand how to begin to have a conversation with somebody that they do care about. How do you do this without condemning the individual and driving them deeper and deeper into the ideology? So we will guide them through that process. We will provide support groups so they can meet. We have a parent support group. We have a mother's support group. We have a veterans support group, a women's support group that will help you and provide those sorts of connections. Some of our clients come to us that as a result, those family and friends, we will then reach out to the individual and see if they are open for exit services. And I say open because one has to want to leave this life of hate behind. We can't force it on anybody, no matter how much we may want to. And so we will go through a series of activities. We begin a rather robust intake session just to understand what we're working with. And that becomes important because I can tell you that right now, 90% of our clients come to us either with thoughts of suicidal ideation or a desire to still harm others. That is what we are dealing with. So one of the first things we have to do, we are a national organization. We provide all of our services online. We provide all of our services for free. So one of the first things we have to do is we have to identify licensed mental health care professionals in the states where these individuals are living. Simply because the healthcare laws make it impossible for me to offer a psychologist or a therapist because they have to be licensed in the state where the person is living. So we will find that and begin to work through an exit process that often takes 18 to 24 months for somebody to truly disengage and reintegrate into civil society. In addition to coming to us through friends and family, we will also have individuals that will reach out to us directly. They will reach out to us because their life has hit rock bottom. They are about to lose their wife or girlfriend. Their children are about to be taken away. They can't find a job. They're being kicked out of their housing. They're facing incarceration. Some reason, some trigger has led them to realizing that it's time to get out. Some of them will also come to us because they'll, in a moment of clarity, they will have a softening of their ideology. They will realize that they've spent years railing against those damn illegals who are stealing all of our jobs. And in that rare moment, will realize they don't know a single person who's ever lost a job to an undocumented immigrant. Not a single person in their life. And they'll wonder what else have they been advocating for that may not necessarily be true. That's how Life After Hate has largely been operating for the last 14 years. We've been working with friends and family. We've been working with individuals who are seeking help, looking to disengage. That's changed in the last few years. We now have a third stream that is coming to us, thanks to things that happened in Charlottesville, thanks to January 6th, thanks to things like the Tops grocery store shooting in Buffalo, the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, even the protests that you all are seeing in Massachusetts at the governor's mansion. All of that lead us to what is our third stream, and that is working with the courts and working with law enforcement. We now take court-mandated cases. We are now working with some district attorneys' offices in terms of providing diversion programs for individuals who may not have committed violent hate crimes yet, but may have been involved in graffiti, may have been involved in hate speech. When I talk about violent extremism, I want to be very, very clear. We don't work with individuals who are worried because their uncle is saying racist things at Thanksgiving dinner. We work with individuals who not only hold a hateful ideology, but allow that hateful ideology to manifest itself in a desire to harm others. That can be individuals that we think of that are sort of curb stomping Black Americans in the streets, as they would do in the earlier part of the movement in the United States. It also now reflects those keyboard warriors who get onto their computers, go to social media, and call for harm or death of others based on a number of criteria. So if you're calling for the harm, you don't have to do it yourself to be a violent extremist these days. But that leads us to an incredible number of requests from those that the court system, the legal system feels are in need. So we will work and provide diversion programs, provide primary and tertiary care and support services so that those who are involved in hateful acts are not going down the road where they are committing violent crimes. We will work with individuals who are currently incarcerated. It's harder for us to provide our services, but we find the prison systems, with the exception of the federal prison system, often are willing to accommodate providing access online, either through their defense attorneys' systems or through the system that the prisons offer themselves. But we're finding the majority of those cases that are coming to us as terms of parole, that they will be released as long as they are doing something about their ideology. I wish it weren't the case. I spend far too much time talking to defense attorneys and having to make clear that working with Life After Hate is not a get out of jail free card. You will have attorneys that will come to us and say, oh, it would be great if I could sign up my client for service. You can work with them for a couple of weeks. Then we've got our parole hearing. And then once he's released, we're done. And it doesn't work that way. You have to be committed to the process. And quite frankly, if you are then released and you drop Life After Hate, that's something we're going to report to your PO. Because the courts were led to believe we are working with this individual. If we are no longer working with this individual, we have to report that, just as we have a mandate to report on future crimes. That is something that is not necessarily popular. And I will tell you, I've worked with federal defense attorneys who tried to explain to me that after meeting with my team a handful of times over 6 weeks, after his client had been involved in planning a racial war at a U.S. military base, that after 6 weeks and a few sessions, his client was quote unquote cured and would no longer need our services. And he felt uncomfortable requiring those services because he doesn't want the PO to be able to ask questions about what his client may be up to upon release. We don't do that. We have a lot of people who need our services. And as I said, we provide them free of charge. That means I need individuals who are committed to actually changing, who are committed to taking the steps that are necessary to turn their lives around. We believe in Life After Hate. We believe in a mantra of compassion with accountability. And that requires that all of our clients take accountability for their past actions and begin to make amends and begin to do the work that is necessary to get out of that. So as a result, we are working with an increased number of individuals who are either incarcerated or paroled. And that work is going to continue. It continues to rise each and every day, as I said, both at the state level as well as at the federal level. The newest addition we've taken on, thanks to those of you who work within the criminal justice system, is we are now working with juveniles. And this is something that originally made me quite uncomfortable for a whole host of reasons. But we're getting more and more requests from juveniles and from their legal counsel about enrolling them in services. For me, the uncomfortability came from two areas. The first, obviously, becomes with an issue of consent. And I very quickly learned is that if they are currently in juvenile detention, the state gets to consent for them, not their parents. So what we've done is we've set an age. Now we are working with those between the ages of 16 and 18. I believe in most states, including Massachusetts, if you are 16, you are allowed to consent yourself for mental health services. While we are not a mental health clinic, that is the standard we are using for our own consent age. But I will sort of close and see what questions you all have. What surprised me, the other reason I was uncomfortable working with juveniles is my initial belief was most of those individuals that would want our help were violent extremists, were ideologically haters because it was something they learned at home. It was something they got from their parents. And how do you convince a parent who is preaching this ideology at home to allow their children to leave it? And I was very quickly corrected by my team about how wrong I was. And surprisingly, the vast majority of those individuals that are under the age of 18 who are coming to us come to us having been raised largely in loving homes with parents who would be identified as politically progressive. And these children have realized that they can't ask their parents for consent because their parents don't know the lives that they're leading. And they realize how embarrassed and mortified their parents would be if they knew what their children were doing. That said, don't get me wrong. We do get juvenile cases whose parents are just as hateful and just as ideologically driven as they are. And sometimes those parents will want to work with us as well. Sometimes those parents will disown and will kick those kids out of their house. And that is something what we do when we talk about sort of wraparound services. Yes, we provide exit services. We have our case managers and our exit specialists working with all of our clients. We also, though, have a national resource map that we assist all of our clients as well as the loved ones in their lives with whatever information we can provide. So regardless of which state you live in, we can find you individuals who will help you with housing. We will find you individuals that will help you with job placement. We will find you individuals who will help you with tattoo removal when you realize you can't get housing and you can't get a job because you got a swastika tattooed on your neck. We will find you individuals who will, who are licensed mental health care providers who will work with you. And that becomes essential. I think most of you have probably worked with trauma victims. You've worked with at-risk populations. We do a lot of work with the mental health community. We do trainings for mental health professionals. And we will often get those, they'll say, oh, I've worked in a prison. I've worked with domestic abuse victims. I've worked with the gang units. I've even worked with cults. This isn't going to be a problem. And that changes when all of a sudden you have sitting in your office 3 feet from you a violent white supremacist who wants nothing more than to wipe you and your family off the earth. And so we work very closely with mental health professionals to make sure they are not only educated in the population and the work that's at hand, but that they have the comfort level to be successful. Because these individuals that we work with have zero trust in any institution. And we experience it all the time where mental health professionals will often decide they need to quit a client because this is just too much for them to handle. Can we help somebody else? Can we find somebody else for this individual? And that can often do more damage than good. What I can tell you, as I said, the average exit process takes an individual 18 to 24 months. The timing varies. It's not linear. The timing varies based on how long somebody has been in the movement, how active they've been in the movement, and how committed they are to the process. What I can tell you is that when one is successfully exits, when one has been positively discharged from our program, the recidivism rate is almost nil. They do not revert back to those violent far-right extremist ways. And I realize I always try not to use the term violent far-right because that often has political connotations for many people. I've been accused, why aren't I as concerned with the violent far left? We do have clients that are Antifa. We do have individuals who have been part of eco-terrorism that have inquired about ours. We even have a couple of clients that have come to us as they've been proponents of violent Islam. But we started as an organization focusing on the violent far right because that is what our founders were members of. But I often have to remind folks that when we talk about the violent far right, I'm not making a political statement. It is unfortunate. I get my share of death threats. Some of them are those that law enforcement tells me I need to be concerned with. And when I'm asked that question about why the violent far right, not the violent far left, I can often talk about there's a difference between wanting to do damage to buildings and institutions versus wanting to do damage to people. But I will, and my staff cringes when I say this, we have an issue in this country with people who cannot distinguish between those who wear red baseball caps and those who wear white hoods. And so I am talking about those who wear white hoods. I am talking about American Nazis. I'm not making any political statements with that. But the program works for those who are committed to it. And it is heartening that we're seeing, I wish it wasn't having to happen, but we see more and more members of law enforcement, district attorneys' offices, legal teams that reach out to us realizing that this is actually a service that can not only help their clients, but more importantly, can make society just a little bit safer.
Thank you, Pat. Unfortunately, the comment you make about the children coming from families, not that you ever expect, but that you wouldn't expect, is exactly a situation we had last week. A very young child, really awful rhetoric, and parents who were completely mortified, horrified that their child would behave that way, people known in the community for being welcoming and all of those things. And I think for everybody, for the police and the school that was dealing with it, it was sort of a wake-up call because these were certainly the last parents they expected to have a child who was doing what had happened in the school.
It is. Yeah, I will just say
sorry.
very quickly, when you're talking about individuals who are recruited for these violent extremist groups, let me be very clear. They don't often start off with the rhetoric, with the ideology. They are recruited because they are vulnerable. They are recruited because they were victims of trauma when they were young. They are recruited because they have this greater sense that they don't fit in, they don't belong, nobody understands them, they feel isolated. That's who these groups prey on. And then once they begin to suck them in and recruit them and play on their and play on those insecurities, then the individuals have to begin to adopt the ideology in order to remain. It's not the hateful ideology that's often the start.
Questions, comments for Pat?
I have a quick question for you, Pat. As you talked about the mental health struggle that most of these individuals are going through and that vulnerability of them getting recruiting, what is the flip side of that? Like if you're working with a client, are you seeing that those extremist groups are still trying to hold on to that individual, are still trying to get access to that individual? Because I'm wondering what the struggle that person is going through, not only dealing with their own mental health, but then having this other group that they were part of still trying to hold on to them? Or does it just go away once this individual makes the commitment to get the help?
It doesn't necessarily go away. I think there are a couple of issues at play. One is when you look to leave one of these violent extremist groups, even if you're looking to simply change groups, it's like leaving gangs. There's a matter of you risk real physical violence because you're leaving the group behind. It's doubly so when you're looking to work with an organization like ours, because it's one thing to be disloyal to the group. Now you're disloyal to the movement when you're looking to disengage. That is a very serious concern. We have many clients that have faced physical beatdowns as a result of it. We have many clients that still fear for their lives because depending on where they were and how much power they held within the organization, the higher up in the group they were, the greater threat they're perceived, because everybody has this belief that they're coming to us and we're immediately taking them to you all. And they are detailing everything that's happened in their lives. They're naming names. They're talking about events. That doesn't happen. We don't do that. As I said, we are a mandate to report organization. We do take that seriously. So that becomes very real. And so our clients are mindful of that. Some of them will try to exit while remaining active in the group. They will believe that they can exit the ideology, but still be part of the group for social issues. They can still drink with their friends. They can still hang out with them. Doesn't work that way. It's why the friends and family and loved ones become so important, because you need to build a support culture. What becomes essential in understanding this population is when they are leaving their initial lives to join an extremist movement, they are forced to largely leave behind every structure they had in their lives. Their mothers, their fathers, their siblings, their teachers, their priests, everybody that's provided them support over the years. They have to repudiate. They have to leave them behind. The movement becomes both parent and priest to them. And so one of the greatest obstacles is when they realize it's time to leave the movement, either to save themselves or because their ideology is softening. They recognize they now have to leave behind the only group that supports them and have to do so with no guarantees that we're going to welcome them back to civil society. No guarantees at all. And so that takes a strength that some people don't have. And that can be a roadblock to successful exit.
Pat, thank you. That was incredibly helpful. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you. All right, Jawan, you have something you want to talk to the group about?
Yes, thank you. I didn't know hope everybody is well. And thank you, sir, for that presentation. But I didn't know if anyone had heard anything around, I believe, Senate Bill 17 and the number of DEI programs that are being withdrawn from state funded colleges and universities. So not so much attached to the presentation, but just, wanted to share that with the group.
Right. I don't know if anybody's heard about that bill. Anybody have any experience with it?
I think
Alice, you
maybe,
gonna say something?
yeah, I think it might relate. I know that there is a bill with that number in Texas related to some movements, a movement that they have in their higher education. I'm not familiar anything in Massachusetts, but it's certainly something we can look into, and obviously very concerning hearing about what's happening in Texas.
Thank you.
And Reverend Lloyd, I'm gonna get that Loan Depot decision. My guess is, and this is a problem for lawyers in those cases. My guess is that the plaintiffs made the choice to take an undisclosed settlement to get more money. But it sounds like Loan Depot also wanted to get some credit for changing their practices. So we'll actually get that decision. We can talk a little bit about that at the next meeting. Anybody else have anything they're doing, they want to put out there? Again, we'll put the form out again for the reporting, and please make sure that people know about that, report things to us. One of the things that was concerning this weekend was people saying that they think, and we're certainly doing training around this, but we'll continue to do it, that sometimes police, they report X happened. Police take that report, but interpret it as something else rather than hate speech or a hate crime. So if that's happening, and if there are people who need further education about that, we're happy to focus on that. Linda, did you have a question?
I do, actually. In the beginning, you mentioned that Reading is not the only place where elected officials, volunteers are being threatened. And I'm wondering if you have given out any advice, or two things. One, if you've given any advice to those elected officials as to what to do about it. But two, if you've seen any of those threats followed through. Like in Reading, there was the call to eradicate those of us that were named on a cabal that was trying to damage the community. Have you seen anyone following through on those threats?
Fortunately, no. I think that in part is because we really do have very engaged law enforcement partners. Then when we're reporting things, they're taking it very seriously. We did have some guidance that we gave out. I think Reading got it, but just about what to do on those meetings and how to shut things down and how to make it, sometimes people just don't know how to jump in fast enough and end it, and things get out of control, but we can send that back out again. You can send that around to this list.
Some of it has been through written communications on social media and blogs that have been sent out to all town meeting members,
right,
and leadership, but not necessarily coming outright at meetings. There has been heckling and nastiness, but not the threats.
Right. And we're always happy to look at that. I mean, it is a threat, it is a needle that you're trying to thread between what is free speech and when it becomes a threat. And we are all, I would say virtually every day, we have some community sending us things that we're looking at, can we charge, can we not charge, based on what people say. And some people are very careful, they walk that line very closely and not enough. So I see Antonia is telling me
I'm just
about
putting in the chat,
the
some
annual
people have been
marathon
sharing.
fest. Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
thing.
People have just been sharing some events that are going to be happening and just passing it along to everybody.
All right, Patrick, did you have a question? No? Okay. All right. We will see you all again on May the 9th. If you have concerns or thoughts or things you want to hear more about, please feel free to reach out to Antonia and we will make that happen. So thank you all for being here this morning. Enjoy the holiday weekend.